So good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Roger Mark de Souza, Director of Population, Environmental Security and Resilience here at the Woodrow Wilson Center. So we're here to discuss a number of very interesting topics: population dynamics, family planning and reproductive health, the environment, climate change, and development. Wow, small set of issues. We want to think about how all of these issues come together, how are they related, and particular, what is there about the interaction of these issues around lake basins? So we have two friends and experts on these issues who will be talking to us about these issues from Victoria to Chilwa, tales from two lake basins in Eastern and Southern Africa. I also want to give you a welcome to what our boss, Jane Harmon, calls our intellectual candy shop. That's how she describes the Wilson Center, an intellectual candy shop where you don't get fat on spin. You get fat on those brownies out there, but not on spin. So welcome, and as many of you know, we serve as a living memorial to President Wilson and to his legacy, and in his name we bring together analysis, policy, and practice. I also want to give a special shout out and happy birthday to our program. We've just celebrated our 20th birthday. So this is our environmental change and security program, and I want to acknowledge my outstanding colleagues who for many years have been working very hard to bring to you the various connections between health, environment, livelihoods, population, and security. So I'll just ask you to join me in a round of applause. Sometimes I think I'm just the luckiest guy to work with his team. So just a special shout out to my team and my colleagues, so thank you. We are together here today as part of our HELPS project, which stands for Health, Environment, Livelihoods, Population, and Security. It's an initiative that's being funded by USAID's Office of Population and Reproductive Health. So I want to give a special thanks and acknowledgement to our speakers today. Most recently, we were together in a number of settings talking about these issues. And not only did we have very meaningful and substantive discussions around these issues, but we had a number of very good laughs also. So our speakers are both substantive, very detail-oriented, and also entertaining. So Doreen is going to start us off, and Doreen Othero is the Regional Program Coordinator for the Population, Health and Environment Program at the Lake Victoria Basin Commission of the East African Community. And Doreen was saying to me, when we were talking about this event, she said, Roger Mark, will the people know what PHE is? So looking at the connection between these issues around population, reproductive health, and the environment. And Doreen has a lot of knowledge and experience on health policy analysis, health systems research, sexual reproductive health and rights, child health, as well as cross-sectoral integrated approaches to population health and environment PhD programming. She's a well-established, well-known academic and has held a number of senior management and teaching positions in a number of universities and is widely published in peer-reviewed journals. So Doreen, with that introduction, I'd like to hand it over to you. Would you like to come up? Yes?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Roger Mark. Thank you, distinguished audience. In Africa, we always say, all protocols observed. It gives me great pleasure to be here this afternoon because back home it's night. I think people are sleeping. And I'll be speaking to you about the need for advocacy, regional coordination for integrated population health and environment approaches, singling out the Lake Victoria Basin Commission. And this is to help us understand and possibly appreciate how structured coordination and advocacy can harness political support and decision-making for PHE, that is the population, health, and environment. And I asked Roger Mark if the audience understands PHE. We like using the abbreviation. And he told me that you do. And in case you don't, integrated population health and environment is a relatively new approach to sustainable development that integrates issues of family planning, sexual reproductive health, maternal health, child health, with environmental conservation. So the interventions on family planning, maternal child health, and others are implemented alongside environmental conservation efforts, reason to achieve synergistic successes. So I'll go to my presentation now. And in my presentation, I'll quickly, in a very abbreviated manner, in the interest of time, talk about who the East African community is, Lake Victoria Basin Commission that I represent, why we are here today, give you a quick overview of the basin, the lake and the basin, the population health and environment challenges that we have, but why my organization fronts advocacy, what we have done so far, what we are doing, our future outlook, and a small, maybe just overview on one of the projects that has worked. So basically what I'm presenting is at program level. My colleague will be talking to you about a project. So these are two different levels. So who is the East African community? The East African community is a regional economic community established through a treaty in 1999. And this community currently brings together 5 countries: Republic of Burundi, Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, and Uganda. South Sudan was just about to join, but you know what's happening now in South Sudan, so we are giving them time. And the community has a vision, and the vision is to widen and deepen integration for the economic and sustainable development of the region. And you can see I'm underlining the word integration, because integration is the driving force. And it's not just integration of the countries, it's also integration of sectors. The East African community has 5 pillars: common market, customs union, political federation, and the monetary union. These are the 5 pillars that brought the 5 countries together that we want to achieve as a community. But the driving force for these 5 will be integration. The community has 5 organs. We talk about the summit, that is the meeting of the heads of states. Then the East African Court of Justice, we have a court. We have the East African Legislative Assembly, that is the parliament for the 5 countries. We have the Council of Ministers, full council, and we have the Secretariat. Those are 5 organs. But we also have institutions of the community: Lake Victoria Basin Commission, Lake Victoria Fisheries Organization, the Inter-University Council for East Africa, the Civil Aviation Security and Safety Oversight Agency, known as CASOA, and the East African Development Bank. So those are institutions of the community, each one of them established by a protocol under the treaty. So I represent the Lake Victoria Basin Commission today. So who is this Lake Victoria Basin Commission? As I've mentioned, it's an institution of the community established under Article 114 of the treaty that brought the 5 countries together, and with a powerful vision. A prosperous population is what we want to see, living in a healthy and sustainably managed environment and providing equitable opportunities and benefits to the people of the basin. And what is our mandate as an institution? Our mandate is to promote, coordinate, and facilitate activities of actors, state and non-state actors, towards the sustainable development of the basin. And that's why I mentioned that I'm presenting at program level. My colleague will present at project level. So that's our governance structure. The Lake Victoria Basin Commission works very closely with civil society organizations, the governments. We have a sectoral council of ministers for Lake Victoria Basin Commission that oversees what we do. And all that we do is channeled to the summit, that is the meeting of the heads of states. My being here will be included in the report to the next summit, which is coming in about 3 months' time. So why am I here? I'm here because we were invited by the Population Action International, because we have become partners, and because we are both members of the Population and Sustainable Development Alliance. I'm sure the Wilson Center is also a member. And because we want to share experiences, we are all propagating the PHE agenda. We seem to be like-minded, and we are extremely excited to be here. So that is the Lake Victoria and the Basin. Quickly, I'm talking about the East African community. These are the countries around this circle. But now when you look at this white bit, that becomes the lake. The lake is shared by 3 countries, Kenya, Uganda, and Tanzania. But the catchment is very large. 3/4 of the Republic of Rwanda is in the basin, Republic of Rwanda, and yet they don't fetch any water from the lake, but they have rivers that feed into the lake. And therefore, those rivers will determine whether Lake Victoria will live or will die. So I'm talking about Lake Victoria with a surface area of 68,000 square kilometers. It is Africa's largest lake and the largest tropical lake in the world, and the planet's 2nd largest freshwater lake. Only North America's Lake Superior is larger than Lake Victoria. So I'm talking about an icon for this planet. Lake Victoria produces about 81,460 tons of fish annually, valued at US dollars 318 million, that is annually. The basin is large, together with the lake, 193 square kilometers, with an average population of 40 million people. There are enormous, abundant resources. However, there are challenges to these resources. This is what I've talked about in a nutshell. What are these challenges? Very quickly, we have environmental challenges, water and sanitation challenges, population challenges, health and sexual reproductive health challenges. What you can see there are some pictures of land degradation. As you can see, 41% of the land in the basin is degraded. Only 16% is cultivated. So the situation is very serious. There's a lot of pollution. This is Lake Victoria. We wash vehicles in the lake. I'm saying that softly. And because of this pollution, we have invasive weeds, aquatic weeds, like the water hyacinth. The lake is almost covered by this weed, and therefore our fish is almost extinct. Poor water quality and scarcity. We have a lot of issues. You can see a lot of water, but this water is being shared by animals. We wash ourselves there, and we drink it. You can see young girls, instead of going to school, they're scavenging for water. Same to this and that. Looking at the population. Way back, I want us to follow this first diagram. Way back in 1960, we were very comfortable. The population was quite low. Then 1970, 80, 90, 2000, 2005, 2015. That is where we are headed. The Republic of Kenya, around the Lake Basin, will have more than 100 people per square kilometers. Actually, the basin is one of the most densely populated parts of this world. That is not enough. It's not only human population. Cattle, cows. You can see the basin, the population of animals in the basin actually exceeds the African average. So it's not only people. I'm surprised when I was looking at these, but I must confess I also keep them. And now they are becoming a problem to us. Health is a major problem, and I would like us to take note of this because I'll talk about this in a short while. Women are very fertile. We have women, on average, 12 to 15 children per woman. Reason, because some will die, a few will survive. Child and infant mortality is very high because of the issues I've mentioned above. Maternal mortality ratio is still quite high, especially in some parts of the basin, ranging between 530 to 1,000. Under 5 mortality the same. HIV prevalence among the fishing communities in the Lake Victoria Basin is 26%. Out of every 100 fishermen, 26 are infected. Family planning and unmet need, still high. Those are just some graphs on the maternal mortality, family planning prevalence. Although it is improving, and you can see the Republic of Rwanda is doing pretty well, but the other countries of the East African community are still lagging behind. The unmet need, the same, and Uganda has a major problem. So what is not going right in the basin? We have a lot of donor funding from Europe, from America, from all over the world. We also have a lot of projects, and I've put the word vertically in uppercase. Our projects are vertically implemented. It's a health project, it's an environmental conservation project. We have a lot of actors, but they are uncoordinated. There is minimum impact on the beneficiaries. Excuse me. So, why are we seeing this? It is because the projects, by design or by default, excluded issues of population. If it's environmental conservation, it is just reforestation, no population issues. So that is where the rain started beating us. And therefore, an integrated approach could be the way out. So against that background, that very long background, the Lake Victoria Basin Commission, together with the USAID East Africa Regional Office, designed an integrated population health and environment program, and that is our understanding. It is an approach, and I mentioned, to sustainable development that integrates health and environmental conservation. But our main question is, does integration work? What is the value of integration? Can sectors that are not related traditionally come and work together? And we are saying, yes, it is possible. We will see from her presentation and also a case study that I'll give. So what do? We do a lot of advocacy in Lake Victoria Basin Commission, partnerships and collaborations. We are strengthening PhD networks in the 5 countries. We are mainstreaming PHE into new and existing projects. That is our role as a commission. Capacity building at different levels, and now we are coming up with PHE champions in the East African community. We coordinate activities of state and non-state actors. I'm talking about a program. So we do regional coordination of PHE projects. We are doing PHE research, and of course, review and harmonization of policies. And why are we fronting this? Because we want to harness understanding, political buy-in, patronage, policy and decision-making, resource mobilization, and we want the beneficiaries to accept the new approach. That's why we are doing all these things. So what have we done? I'll go to that slide. So far, the Lake Victoria Basin Commission, and particularly my program, we have already introduced PHE among the ministers. It is fully and well accepted. Among the 5 presidents, they have endorsed it without any problem. We have also inducted our members of parliaments in the 5 countries and the East African Legislative Assembly, the regional parliament. They have taken on this PHE approach, and now they feel that is the way to go and the only vehicle we can use to achieve sustainable development. We have established a regional technical working group that is integrated. We are now bringing civil society together with government. We have a meeting of permanent secretaries established and a parliamentary dialogue forum. So there is much more that we are doing, developing a regional strategic plan for PHE, communication and advocacy plan, capacity building, I've talked about it, and so on and so forth. So what is our future outlook? Our future outlook is to develop a PHE curriculum, regional PHE curriculum to be taught in universities and secondary schools. And we are going to do this together with our sister organization known as the Inter-University Council for East Africa. Of course, harmonization of policies, documenting PHE best practices from the projects, mainstreaming PHE into hotspots. We have hotspots, and resource mobilization. So these are some of the hotspots: the fishing communities, our wet and dry borders, our protected areas. These women have been arrested because they went looking for firewood, wood fuel from the protected areas, and the islands. These are our target areas for PHE. And I said I would mention what has worked. Does PHE make sense? The answer is yes. I don't know how many of you have heard of the HOPE LVB project. Health of People and the Environment is one of the projects funded by the MacArthur and Packard Foundation, implemented in the basin, and it has proved that PHE makes sense. It is on a pilot basis, and what has come out is clear that men can actually engage in family planning and reproductive health as women engage in sustainable livelihoods and conservation activities, while young people can engage in income-generating activities. There is now evidence to that. These are some of the model households under that project, and these are statistics. When the project started, family planning uptake was very low. After just about a year and a half, we are now seeing a lot of coverage for family planning. You can see these are actually the number of new family planning clients. This is a lady who is a champion of PHE. She's riding her motorcycle, carrying patients, taking to hospital. They appreciate the value of the integrated approach. And I would like all of us to read this, please. In a chorus, if you allow me. We go. I wish we got this FP education earlier. We would have made better decisions about our family sizes. We are now faced with all these problems as we do not have enough resources to take care of our big families. Our children should not be like us. This is one of the fishermen. There are few challenges. How do we measure the synergies? How do we mainstream into projects that are donor funded with goals and objectives and they are vertical in nature? Political buy-in. Can the politicians accept it has worked for us? A few lessons. Advocacy is very important. Top-down is good, but top-down is very good. We targeted the top level coming downwards, but they require evidence that PHE makes sense. And of course, need for partnerships, clear coordination, and political buy-in. I would like to acknowledge the HOPE LVB project, the LVBC Environmental Conservation Projects, and USAID East Africa that has made this to happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Doreen. All protocols observed. Your family and friends back home may be sleeping, but we are still very much awake after that presentation. Thanks very much. It's wonderful to see your skills once again as a chorus conductor. You've put your skills very much to good use. What I liked in your presentation, Doreen, I found that your background was very strong. I found that you did a really good job of making the case, and I go back to your background where you specifically talked about projects by design or default have excluded issues of population. I'm a little intrigued to hear more about how you got this policy integration and these politicians to buy in. So I hope we'll get to that in the discussion. I'd also love to hear a little bit more specifically about these PHE champions that you mentioned. So I hope we'll talk a little bit more about that. And I was quite struck by a phrase that you said, which I don't very often hear in Washington, D.C., which is top down is very good. So I see my colleagues agree with me. So I anticipate that you may have a few questions to explain a little bit more by what you mean by that. But I think a really good background for us and some provocative statements and excellent delivery. So we look forward to an engaging discussion shortly. So Deepa, she set the stage for you. She set you up. So Deepa Pullanikkatil is a longtime friend, civil engineer, who says she's turned environmental manager. She has a lot of experience in India, Lesotho, and Malawi over the past 13 years. And she works at an organization called LEAD, Leadership for Environment and Development, where she manages projects in population and environmental linkages, as well as integrating ecosystem approaches into development planning. Deepa has been very active in policy circles in Malawi. She's really one of the leaders in the environmental movement and environmental research in Malawi, and has coordinated the development of the Malawi National Climate Change Policy, has coordinated the development of the Malawi National Climate Change Policy. So very well positioned, and has made a lot of contributions to the national report on Rio Plus 20 for Malawi. And in talking to Deepa over the years about these processes, she would say, you know, Roger Mark, I go into this drafting committee for Malawi's national climate change policy. Number one, I'm the only woman in the room, sometimes you've said to me, and number two, I'm the only one saying, what about reproductive health and family planning? How does this fit into climate change policy? So some very interesting perspectives to build upon, which you and I have talked about in terms of Lake Chilwa a number of times. So very much looking forward to your presentation, Deepa.
Thank you, Roger Mark. I'm very happy to be here and share experiences from the Lake Chilwa Basin in southern Malawi. In case you don't know about Malawi, it's a country located in Southeast Africa with a population of just over 15 million. 85% of Malawians live in rural areas and depend on rain-fed agriculture for their livelihood. They're mostly at subsistence level. And 1/3 of the country has a lake, the Lake Malawi, and millions of people depend on the lake for their livelihoods. This is the map of Malawi, and if you can look down, Lake Chilwa is the second largest lake in Malawi, located in the southern part of the country. And this is a Google Earth image, and this is the Zomba Malosa mountain range, and there are 5 rivers that originate from this mountain range and flow into the lake. This lake is quite interesting because it has no outlet, so it's not a freshwater lake, it's a saline lake, and it's also shared by Mozambique on the right side. There's one river that flows from Mozambique into this lake. The lake is only 2.5 meters in depth. It's a shallow lake, so that's like 8 feet. So it's quite shallow, and because of that, it's a very fragile ecosystem, and the lake has dried up in the past. In the past 100 years, it has dried up 9 times. Fishing is a main livelihood activity for people that live around the lake basin. And the lake is also a very special bird breeding site. There are about 153 species of birds that come to Lake Chilwa, and 30 of them are migratory birds that fly in from Europe to Lake Chilwa. And so it's a Ramsar site and also a UNESCO biodiversity reserve. It's beautiful. If you love birds, you should visit Lake Chilwa. The people that live around the lake, they're mostly dependent on natural resources for their livelihoods. Fishing, farming, there's a lot of rice farming, maize, sorghum, and they also cut firewood for their own use as well as for sale. Bird hunting also happening. And there are a number of challenges similar to the ones that Doreen presented. Deforestation is happening so rapidly, and because, as I mentioned, the lake is so shallow, when there's climate variability, it affects the levels of the lake. Population growth, the ecosystem is quite productive, so there are many people that migrate into the Lake Chilwa Basin to eke out a living. And there's the heavy dependence on natural resources, so when there's population increase, there's more competition and demand for natural resources. This is an image of people cutting down trees illegally from Zomba Forest, because it's a forest reserve, you're not supposed to cut down trees. This forest fire, people set the forests on fire for increasing agricultural land, so there's the forest agriculture interface that forests are getting less and less. And they also just light fire to catch small animals and insects to eat. And there's also a lot of charcoal making happening, which is environmentally degrading. If you look at this river, Mulunguzi, on the top photograph, that comes from Zomba Mountain, which is in an area that's well forested. So you can see that the water quality is so good. The same Mulunguzi River joins Likangala River downhill, just a few kilometers away, and you can see how badly the water quality has changed. This is from sand mining and riverbank cultivation along the Likangala River catchment area. So land use has impacted water quality. Malawi became independent in 1964, and then there was a regime that ruled Malawi for 30 years. And that regime felt that family planning was a Western concept, so it was banned. So population was 3 million, and it increased, and now we have 15 million. So already the exponential growth of population is something that we are facing the impacts of. And as a result of increasing population, and when 85% of people are dependent on farming for their livelihoods, arable land, per capita arable land, is on a decline. So we have right now about 0.2 hectares of land per person, which is about half the size of a football field. And the fertility of Lake Chilwa Basin is quite high. There are some areas where the total fertility rate is 7, although the national average is 5.7. So you can imagine if there are 9 people or 10 people in a household, how will they survive on half a football field, to produce their food? Per capita water availability is also decreasing, and it's projected that by 2032, we'll reach 300 meter cubes of water per person per year. And globally, the average is 1,500 meter cube, and US is consuming 2,500 per person. So you can see the contrast. And as a result of overfishing in the Lake Chilwa fish species, the catches have declined over the years. But demand is still there for fish, and people have been able to meet the demand through aquaculture and fish ponds. Malawi is also affected by climate change. Over the past 40 years, temperature has increased by 0.9 degrees. Although average rainfall, annual rainfall is the same, but rainfall patterns have been changing. And there's been a number of extreme events, weather events, with droughts and floods affecting people's livelihoods. Lake Chilwa is also unique in terms of some unique human habitats that you'll find. This is a Zimbabwela, which is a floating hut. There are migrant fishermen that come to the lake. They spend 2 to 3 months living in these floating huts, and they catch fish, they smoke them or dry them and sell and make some money and then go back to their families in another district. So it's easy for them to live in these Zimbabwelas, because if you need to get land and build a proper house, you need permission from the chief, and you have to be from that area. So it's more complicated, but this is an easy way for migrant fishermen to come and fish in Lake Chilwa. But this is not very good health-wise, because they don't have sanitation facilities. So they use the water from the lake, and behind the house is the sanitation. Yeah. So what is our project doing in Lake Chilwa? I work for LEAD, and LEAD with its partners, World Fish Center and the Forestry Department of Government of Malawi, we are implementing a project called the Lake Chilwa Basin Climate Change Adaptation Program. It's funded by the Norwegian government, and the focus is purely on environment. Environment and livelihoods, how can we improve the resilience of people and the natural resource base to climate change impacts? Some of the activities that we've done, we've trained community-based organizations, some key stakeholders in the basin, like faith groups, drama groups, members of parliament, and so on what is climate change and what are the impacts and how can they adapt better to climate change. We've also assisted the Meteorological Services Department by helping them set up weather monitoring stations and lake level and river level monitors. And the monitoring is done by the communities themselves, citizen science. We've also introduced some technologies, such as the improved fish smoking kilns. Previously, people used to have an open fire and have grills where they put their fish and allow it to smoke. But that was not very efficient. You need a lot of firewood to do that, because 80% of the heat is lost. So using this, it's a kiln from Thailand, which you can open the door like a wardrobe and insert many grills with lots of fish. And at the bottom, there is a stove which uses very little firewood to smoke large quantity of fish. Women fish processing groups have been losing a lot of income by wastage of fish, and also by unhygienic ways in which they dry fish. So in Malawi, it's the men who go fishing, and then the women process the fish or sell them. They are fish traders and fish processors. So what they would do is have poles and a net over them and have fish spread out and dried in the open. So it's contaminated by flies and dust, and sometimes if it rains, it doesn't dry very well, and so on. So we built these solar fish dryers, which is like a greenhouse, and it is quite hygienic. It has a door, so there's no contamination. And so we were able to reduce the wastage of fish during the drying process, and thereby improve the women's incomes. We've also supported hundreds of farmers with conservation agriculture, and that's a farm that is showing mulching, and it's helping to improve soil fertility and water retention in these farms. We've also supported village natural resource management committees with helping them with registration and also setting up tree nurseries and doing tree planting activities. So these are some of the activities that we've done. And as you can see, it's mostly livelihoods and environment related activities. We've also supported farmers with markets, linking them to markets so that they get better prices for chilies and pigeon peas and so on. So, but because we work so closely with the communities, and some of the services don't reach them, but because our project is working with them, we are able to talk to them about what their problems are. And during our discussions, about halfway through the project, we asked them, you know, is there something that is missing? Why aren't the participation of women was not as high as we expected? And we wanted to know if there's anything wrong that we're doing so that we can improve our delivery. But what they told us was that most of them are suffering from diseases like bilharzia. And if you're sick all the time, you can't participate in climate change adaptation projects. So the bilharzia came up many times in the discussion. And the communities were able to diagnose that they have bilharzia, but they're not able to go and access treatment for that. So I hope you know what bilharzia is. Oh, okay, it's also called schistosomiasis, and it's a debilitating disease. You get bilharzia by contact with water, which contains the schistosome parasites. So those are like tiny worms which are hosted by snails. So snails are the vectors that spread this disease. So you'll find it in water, in areas where these snails are. And if you walk in the water or touch the water, through unbroken skin, the schistosome enters your bloodstream, and then it affects your liver and your bladder. And like severe cases, you have blood in your urine. And it's a slow and painful, like it takes a couple of months. I've had it, so I know. You just feel sicker and sicker, and you can't find out what's happening, but you feel sick and sick. And then if you get tested, you find. But with one dose, you feel, the next day you'll be perfectly fine. Just one dose of medicine, praziquantel, you'll be perfectly fine the next day. But that, they're not able to access that treatment. Then the other thing they were saying is that women are not participating 100% with our projects because they're so busy looking after so many children. So I've met women my age. I met a woman, she was breastfeeding her 10th child, and she's my age, so she's going to have many more children. And I asked her, how much land do you have? So she had 0.6 hectares of land. And I asked her, you know, do you have access to family planning? So she said no. And then I said, if you had access to family planning and you could decide how many children you wanted, how many would you have had? Then she said, oh, then I would have stopped at 4 or 5. So she, you know, it's so unfair that somebody born the same year as me has no control over her body or when she can have children and continues having children. And so she can't really participate in any of the activities that we're doing when she has so many children. Unmet family planning, unmet need for family planning is 27% for Malawi, but I imagine for the Lake Chilwa Basin it's higher. Then in 2012, We've had bad rainfall for 2010 and 2011. And in 2012, we experienced an environmental shock when Lake Chilwa partially dried up. About 70% or more dried up. And that was the year that Roger Mark and Tiana visited. And we actually walked on the area, on the lake, and it was completely dry, and up to the horizon, you can't see any water. So this really affected livelihoods. And with the drying of the lake came another disease outbreak, cholera. 2,000 people were affected by cholera. And the origin was traced to the Zimbowelas, the floating huts. And 3 people died from cholera. You know, at this in 2013, people dying of cholera. So it was quite a shock for us. And because we've been working closely with these communities, we could raise this issue in a press release, and we got some publicity. And as a result, the district health office was able to respond quickly and set up. And that is the cholera, the tent where people were being treated for cholera. But with bilharzia, we were unsure what to do. We're not health experts. LEAD is an environmental organization. So we didn't know how to do. So we tied up with the district health office. And they said that since so many years, there hasn't been any study on bilharzia. The last mapping of snails was done in 1985. So there was no literature or any information about how bad the situation with bilharzia was. And if you look at the percentage of people who have been diagnosed with bilharzia in the hospitals, it's very low, because those are central hospitals, and people have to travel really far to get there, so not everybody goes. So in Malawi, malaria and HIV receives a lot of attention, a lot of funding, but bilharzia is neglected. So we were not sure. So we thought, let's do a research on the prevalence rate to find out what is the percentage of people having bilharzia. And it took some convincing for our donors to give us funds to do that survey. But we were able to, because the communities had requested, so that was our argument, and we did a survey. So these are the children lining up with their urine samples and the prevalence testing. So we had chosen 5 villages at random in one of the districts of the Lake Chilwa Basin, and we found that prevalence ranged from 23% to 49%. And 49% is high. According to WHO standards, if you have 49 or 50% people infected with bilharzia, you have to give mass drug administration to everybody in the whole village and the surrounding areas. So we were kind of curious why these 2 areas, Lamusi and Mukwea, why did they have such high prevalence? And we found that those areas have irrigation schemes. So the snails that harbor the schistosome parasites like the water in the irrigation schemes because it's fresher than the water in the lakes. The lake water is quite saline. So like irrigation is a climate change adaptation technology that is being promoted. But well-intentioned technologies such as irrigation is unknowingly increasing bilharzia prevalence in that area. And when you have irrigation schemes and little ponds and canals, children like to swim in them, and farmers obviously will get in contact with the water, and that's why prevalence was so high. So when we told the Ministry of Health, obviously they wouldn't believe. There hasn't been any study done for so many years, and 49% is huge, so nobody would believe us. And so we were wondering how can we make them believe? And so we published in a peer-reviewed journal so that they could believe us. And this resulted in Ministry of Health making a policy that farmers and out-of-school youth in the areas which have high prevalence are now allowed to access drugs through the mass drug administration, which is being done in targeted schools in closer to the cities. So we're hoping that these drugs would be now made available to the communities in an enhanced manner. With regard to family planning and population issues, we took an advocacy approach using radio listeners clubs. We have radio listeners clubs who are volunteers from community coming together and organizing themselves. We train them on how to record radio programs. We also give them recorders. So they go around their community recording whatever issues that they're interested in, and they send us the programs and we air it on national radio. So they feel quite, these are some of the youth members of the Radio Listeners Club. They feel quite empowered that their voice is now being heard on national radio, and they're able to make a difference that way. But some of the real life difference, it's not only about advocacy and creating awareness, but also about changing lives. For example, there was a radio program that stopped a child marriage by airing a program about child marriages and interviewing someone who was being forced into child marriage. A 16-year-old girl was being forced to marry a 45-year-old man because the man was offering a bride price, and the family was so poverty-stricken that they needed that money. So this girl went and approached the Radio Listeners Club, and they aired a program about child marriage and interviewed main people in the community, like the priests and the principal of her school and so on, and that sort of put pressure on her family to stop this marriage. So we were able to do that, and she is now completing her secondary school education. She wants to be a nurse in future. But child marriage is something very common. 50% of girls in Malawi get married before 18 years. So through radio programs, through awareness, we can address this. The Radio Listeners Club also presented a program about the Chilima Mothers Support Group. This is a group of 15 women who have come together to get out children who have dropped out of school and bring them back to school. Dropping out of school is a coping strategy for families, especially when the lake dried up. There were many families that decided not to send their children to school and get them to help by selling firewood or helping with farming or looking after their siblings while the parents were looking for work. So this group came, pooled in their resources and assisted these families so that the children can come back to school. And they were also able to rescue this 13-year-old girl from being forced into prostitution by her stepfather and mother as a coping strategy again when the lake dried up. So now she's back to school. We've also been able to link these communities with service providers like Family Planning Association of Malawi, and they came to the communities and they presented a video program about population issues. And inspired by that, some of the community members have now formed into a group of lead families, which will go around providing support to other families or sort of peer education to bring down the number of children in their families. As Roger mentioned, we were fortunate to be consultants who were developing the national climate change policy for Malawi. And because of our experience in the Lake Chilwa Basin, we were able to put population as a priority in the policy. And we were questioned about that because there is a population policy, separate population policy in Malawi. So people were asking, why do you want to include population into climate change policy? But we were able to bring out the linkages and convince them that population needs to be a part of the policy. We were also been tasked by UNDP to develop a global environment facility proposal on climate proofing of local development gains in 2 districts. And we have recognized that population puts pressure on natural resources, and that has been included into the proposal. And we want to train journalists on the PHE approach. That's our plan for the future. And at the moment, we don't have any commission that coordinates PHE activities like the Lake Victoria Basin. And I think Malawi needs to take that route. So to conclude, our project started as a purely environmental project, and we were also thinking in silos. And from the communities, they told us that they live integrated lives. They don't live in silos. So from that, we were able to learn and adapt our project to take a more integrated approach. So we are now talking of systems thinking in project planning. And I just want to end with a Chichewa proverb that it takes many hands to fix a roof. So we need different sectors working together in order to achieve the greater goal. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepa. That was excellent. It's really good to see these different components come together, from drama to radio listening club to citizen science to new technologies, the solar fish dryers, to see all of that come together. There were a few statements that you made that really stuck out for me. One of them was, we're not health experts, we're an environmental organization. So sort of organizationally coming to that realization and figuring out what's your strategy to move forward on that. I felt very compelled when you said it took some convincing to get the donors to fund what the community was saying they wanted. Very compelling, an important lesson there, not just for the donor community, but in terms of how you were able to do that as a project. So I'd love to hear more about that. I thought your statement about irrigation being a climate change adaptation strategy, well-intentioned, but having a negative impact. So, we may put in place these strategies that are good and responsive, but also looking at the question of unintended consequences. And if you're working in a program area where you witness these kinds of unintended consequences, how do you deal with that and manage it? When they don't believe you, they still wouldn't believe us. So we had to get it into a peer review journal to get some third-party validation and credibility to be able to move it forward. And of course, sort of ending with the systems thinking, where those different ways, the elephant is mushy, the elephant is having much more of a systematic approach. One area that I hope we would get into is, you mentioned the R word, which is very popular right now, which provokes reaction among us in Washington, D.C. and internationally, which is resilience. And you talked about the resilience of people and natural resource base. And there are a lot of questions about what really does that mean? Is this new? So that is something that I'd love to engage you on at some point. Let's open it up. I'd love to hear your thoughts, your comments, your questions. The event is being webcast live, so when my colleagues come to you with the microphone, I'd ask you to give your name and your affiliation before we have your question or comment. So please, we'd love to hear from you. Yes?
Thanks, everyone. My name is Kane Westerman from Conservation International. Deepa, I just wanted to get back to your comment about how the women were not coming to your meetings, your trainings, or not being involved in your climate change adaptation work. And certainly PHE is a great strategy to get women more involved, but it's much longer term. This woman with 10 children, even if she starts family planning now, she's still not going to have time to be involved. So I was wondering if you had any examples of how your project, or even previous projects that you've worked on, have worked to get over that in a shorter amount of time. For example, did you provide someone to look after children if women needed to bring their children to a meeting or a training, or do you have any other examples of how that has worked?
Great. Yes, we can take another one. Yes, please.
My name is Francoise Risa Kayuzi. I'm from Uganda with Action for Reproductive Health. My question goes to Doreen. I wanted to find out whether you have specific models that are used to integrate PHE with sexual and reproductive health. And if yes, how can one access them?
Great. Okay, thank you. So Deepa, would you like to start? Short-term solutions.
Okay. When we were holding meetings, we would find that there are women coming, some are leaving, they're not participating 100%. So we decided to ask them why they're not participating. Some of them said that in the morning they're very busy, so afternoons are a better time for meetings. So we decided to schedule our meetings accordingly. Then we realized that the children get hungry and thirsty, and so when we have meetings, we carry soft drinks with us, which is really not healthy, like Coke and Fanta and everything. And it's not, so we started buying a maheu, which is like a maize and milk kind of drink. And we found that it's quite filling, so the children are happy, and the women are also okay, and they can stay for a longer period of time and not go back. Yeah. So we adjusted the time and also adjusted the refreshments.
Doreen, on Francoise's question.
Thank you. At the moment, we are in the process of developing models. The PHE approach in Lake Victoria Basin is relatively young. We started off by, using some kind of needs-driven approach, and that's what helped us to put in place some pilot projects. My organization, or the organization I work for, is not an implementing organization. We coordinate other actors. And what those actors do, the example I gave of the HOPE LVB project, is they came up with a minimum package. We supported them to develop a minimum package of PHE services that would be implemented in the basin in areas that needed the three, the P, the H, and the E. But we have other areas that require only the P and the H. And there are areas that just require the E. So we are in the process of developing those different models that would suit in the different catchments and ecosystems. So at the moment, you can only be able to access the basic package, the minimum package, the packages that we have. Thank you.
If we could, Linda here. Linda, I wonder if you could also respond a little bit to that question and give some feedback from your experience also.
Yes, what was your name again?
Françoise.
Françoise. My name is Linda Bruce, and I was the previous director of the Balance Project, which is a 5-year population health and environment project funded by USAID. It was centrally funded. So we produced a number of documents which are housed on the PHE listserv, toolkit. So if you go to knowledgeforhealth.org, is what's it called? K4Health, sorry. K4Health.org. And if you just Google PHE youth education, the training manuals will come up. There's a number of training manuals that are, there's a ton of resources, not only just the balanced resources, but a lot of resources that have been done on with previous PHE projects on that listserv. So you may find some resources that you're looking for on the listserv. For the Balance Project, we did do a youth peer education project, and we trained youth peer educators in conservation and livelihood activities, projects to do PHE work amongst youth. So you might look at that.
Great,
thank you.
There are a number of models and approaches that have been documented. So we can also help you find additional ones. So, yes?
Nancy Harris from JSI. I'd like to ask the wonderful presenters if they have some suggestions on how we can get more traction from the environmental and the health population groups that are giving money, that are programming. We've been around a long time, and the heads of the environmental groups don't seem to be convinced, and the donors are not mandating these programs. They're still mandating siloed programs. So what's your advice? How do how does that advocacy work? How do we reach them?
Great, thank you. Another question? Yes, please, gentleman in the back.
Hello, my name is Bojan Lazarevski. I've been working for 4 years in integrated development planning in South Africa, in Johannesburg, Pretoria, and Ekurhuleni municipalities. Thank you very much for the introduction. It was a very good overall introduction of the programs, but maybe you should also add some precise examples of how your planning interventions contributed to achieving sustainable development of the sustainable growth of the local communities. For example, I'll be short. In South Africa, there was we integrated town planning, environmental planning, economic planning, demographic planning, and health planning. But we use town planning or rural development planning as a basis for it. For example, it was very rarely populated area with strategically densified corridors along the settlement, put a rigid development border, and by increasing the density, there was a sustainable public transport which decreased the pollution using cars and concentration of population, healthcare concentration instead of being dispersed. And for example, those kind of examples that I just a suggestion for next time. Thank you so much.
Great, thank you. And I think Sandeep?
You know, I'm Sandeep with the Wilson Center, and you know that also means I'm a little privy to your schedules, and I was hoping you could tell everybody what you were doing last week as well.
Okay, some insider information there. So we have three questions. So what were you doing last week? How can we get traction from environmental groups? And any specific examples with regard to integrated programming leading to sustainable development? We had the example of planning. So Doreen?
Thank you again. What were we doing last week? I believe it's about the meeting that we were attending at the United Nations. It was the 8th Open Working Group meeting of the United Nations General Assembly that is, I would want to say, brainstorming or stock taking in preparation for the drafting of the Sustainable Development Goals, the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goals. And the 8th session was about oceans, seas, forests, biodiversity, gender equality, human rights, peace, conflict resolution, governance, and the rule of law.
Wow.
So it was packed. I may even have left out some issues. We were there in our capacity as, one, women, and also members of the Women Major Group. There were several major groups that were constituted that have been lobbying for the process. We had a major group for local authorities, scientists, persons with disability, and many others. And of course, I saw quite a number of lawyers and women. Women were the majority because now we had to front our theme. So that is what we were doing. And the proceedings are on the website. The remarks, the conclusions, the summaries of the co-chairs are on the website. But what I would like to say now is that, God willing, issues of population, issues of women, sexual, reproductive health and rights might be or may be included in the final Sustainable Development Goals. I'm saying might because the process is still going on. Countries tend to differ in their thinking and in their opinions, but I think the women did a good job. And in the drafts that we have, we are there. Thank you. Then I would like to just respond to the issue of how to reach the donors who are also operating in silos. By the way, the United Nations is also in silos. You have UNICEF, World Health Organization, UNDP, UNFPA, UNHCR. They are doing different things. And I saw them even at the meeting we were attending, you know. We could see different chairs with labels. What we are doing at the Lake Victoria Basin Commission, and I'll say why I said top-down approach is working. The reason we had to start from the top was, first of all, to convince the leaders of the 5 countries that this approach is good, that this is the best approach to go, because these are the people who negotiate with the donors. So we had to start there, we had to sensitize them, we had to make them accept, understand what the integrated PHE approach was all about. And as we speak now in the East African community, it is accepted at the highest level. And now we have the blessings of the top leadership of the countries to move down and convince different levels and layers of stakeholders. So that is how we did it. We all know that bottom-up approach is usually the best, but there are special situations like this one where you may want to climb the tree from the top. And therefore, at the Lake Victoria Basin Commission, we have 8 environmental conservation projects funded by different donors: the World Bank, African Development Bank, the Norwegians, the government of Sweden, USAID, and others. And now we want to integrate population and health into the environmental conservation projects funded by different donors. So what we are telling them is, look, we are not going to change your objectives. We are not going to change your goals. We are only adding value because we don't see value for your money. And the reason is because you have not addressed the issues of population. A lot of reforestation, a lot of hardware, you know, infrastructure on water and sewerage, but population issues are not addressed. They are calling them software. They call me a coordinator of software projects. And I tell them it's until we deal with the software that the hardware will make sense. So what I wanted to say is, by starting with the top leadership, those who negotiate with the donors, coming down, then they can convince these people that the integrated approach can work.
I think I'll take the first question about how to increase the uptake of PHE. I think for countries like Malawi, we need to have evidence and examples that PHE works. It was quite an eye-opener for me to visit Ethiopia last year for the International Conference on Family and the PHE conference. And we had a chance to visit a PHE site in Volkite, which really showed us how you can integrate, how it can be done. So if we have these examples written up, you know, publications on good practices, that can help create awareness. But at the moment in Malawi, I don't think we have any pilot site where we can take people to and show how PHE has been integrated. So that is needed. And your point on integrated development planning in South Africa, that is well taken. And Malawi has made some progress with integrating this into their district development planning. We have a decentralized structure, and each district has their own district development plans. And UNFPA has been working into integrating population issues into the DDPs. But still, budgeting is still done in silos. So money comes in sectors, and so we still have a long way to go with that.
Great, thank you. Deepa, do you think for the case of Malawi, that even though you're working around the Lake Chilwa Basin, the fact that you have President Joyce Banda, who is such an outspoken champion for this issue of family planning, reproductive health, women's empowerment, and has a reputation globally, does that help, or does that present special opportunities, or is it a problem? How do you work in that context when you have someone at the national level who is known in setting national policy? How does it get down to the level of the basin? Is that helpful or not?
Joyce Banda is the second female president in Africa, and having her as president has really increased the popularity of gender issues and women's rights, as well as increase in family planning, contraceptive prevalence. During her regime, she's focused so much on safe motherhood and family planning that contraceptive prevalence rate has increased. So it's great to have her there. But the donors are still funding in silos. So the Norwegian government, when we approached them trying to integrate health issues, we had to take in the angle that bilharzia is affected by, we had to link bilharzia and climate change in order to convince them, because it's a climate change project and they will give money for climate change activities. So that was fairly easy, because there was literature from Iran and some countries in West Africa that linked increase in irrigation coverage to increase in bilharzia. So that's the angle we took, and that's how we got funding. So I think there's need for donors to go to see PHE sites and see the importance of integration, because population people are only working on family planning issues separately, and they don't really know the environmental aspects, and environmental donors are very much focused on environmental issues, and there's need for training for donors too.
So one of the things, those of us who work on integration have said for a very long time, that when we want to make the case for PHE integration, it has always been easier to make the case around issues related to water. Because of the health impacts, it is an area that folks are able to get the linkages more easily. I wonder if there's anything about the specificity of being around a lake basin. Is there anything around the specific geology where you are both situated that provides additional opportunities that others may not, who are working in a different ecosystem? Any thoughts on that? The fact that both your work is focused around a lake basin.
I think that is very much true. When you're working in a fragile ecosystem like the Lake Chilwa, where you can easily catch diseases like bilharzia, it's not found in other ecosystems. And also, when it's a productive ecosystem, more people want to migrate into that area. So there, the population density increases. It's very much there. You can see it. Even if you live for a few years, you can still feel that, there's an influx of people into that. So then that government and everybody can see that there is a increase in population, and also diseases are more in such water-related kind of ecosystems. And when you have an important biodiversity site, environmentalists are also interested. So it's easier to get the PHE approach, the importance or publicity for PHE approach when you're looking at an ecosystem which is important for biodiversity, important for people's livelihoods, and also is vulnerable to disease outbreaks.
For the case of the Lake Victoria Basin, this is a transboundary ecosystem. As I mentioned in my presentation, it is shared by 5 countries. The lake is shared by 3 countries. The basin is shared by 5 countries. Therefore, there are more challenges, just as Deepa has said, a lot of challenges you saw in my presentation. It's very difficult to apportion blame to anybody in terms of human activity, leave alone apportioning blame to a country, because no country will want to take the blame. For example, pollution of the Lake Victoria, overfishing. There are no boundaries in the lake. Of course, we know there are, but they are not clearly demarcated. There have been conflicts, almost conflicts, because of those boundaries in Lake Victoria. And therefore, portioning blame is very difficult. There is a struggle for the resources. Everybody wants to fish, and therefore there is overfishing. And therefore, it's very, conducive. It becomes a real hotspot then to move in with the PHE approaches. One, because you are dealing with populations that are moving all over the place. They are from different countries, different cultures, different backgrounds, and of course there are many challenges, and therefore it becomes easier to bring in PHE and take it to different countries at the same time, because you are dealing with 5 different governments. So that is the advantage we have.
Very interesting. Thank you. Yes, let's get some more questions in the back.
Hi, Kiki Kalkstein from Pathfinder International. Just wanted to first start off and say thank you so much to Deepa and to Doreen for your presentations, really excellent presentations, and thanks to the Wilson Center for hosting. Wanted to make more of a comment than a question, and just kind of piggyback off of a comment that Doreen, you made, I think during the presentation and also during this discussion, about the top-down approach and advocacy and all of that. And Pathfinder working on the Hope LVB project, really, I think the importance there is really seeing, the excellent top-down advocacy that's happening at that level that Doreen talked about, but then Pathfinder's work on the project to really make sure that we are doing that kind of bottom-up and engaging with communities and different organizations at that community level to make sure that we have the buy-in happening at both levels there, and how really in that project specifically, it's very complementary. So thanks so much to your comment, but just wanted to note that as well.
Great, thank you. Yes? Okay.
Thanks. I'm Colleen Sorto from Conservation International, and I wanted to sort of start by acknowledging something that Doreen had on her slides of talking about, and please don't throw apples or bad fruit at me, but M&E and the importance of monitoring and evaluation. And I'm part of an effort that's promoting integrating freshwater conservation with water sanitation and hygiene, which takes a lot of its inspirations and learning from PHE, and definitely those themes are very close. And M&E is kind of the piece that we're missing to sort of push donors beyond the understanding of, in theory, this works. Have either of you sort of encountered that within your work? And also specifically for the Chilwa example, Deepa, one thing that sort of kind of struck me as you were talking about, as you adjusted your project a long time and responding and bringing in different elements and identifying yourself as an environmental organization and where your training lies, do you think that in the effort to sort of scale these types of integrated approaches, are we getting ourselves caught in sort of am I a PH or E? And what's the importance of having one institution being able to be flexible and sort of being a central pivot point for all the different aspects that need to be included for it to be really holistic and address all of the different dynamics within one particular basin?
Okay, great, thank you. And I think, yes, please.
Hi, thank you. I'm Julia Kent from the World Wildlife Fund. This is for Doreen. You've mentioned that there's 5 countries represented in the basin, but only 3 actually bordering the lake. And so I'm wondering if you have any lessons learned or particular challenges with engaging the 2 governments who do not directly border the lake, and what kind of advice you might have in other basins where they need to engage countries who are directly impacting the basin and the lake without having direct access to the lake.
Great, thank you. So we have a question on M&E and the importance of that and what lessons are learned. Question on scaling up. Do you need to be a P or E or H? What does it mean in terms of flexibility with organizational positioning and programming? And then thinking about, for Doreen, governments that don't border the lake, but they're impacting the lake. So would you like to start, Deepa?
I think I'll address your question first. I don't think that it's possible for all of us to be experts on all the three areas. But we can always partner with organizations. So if we're an environmental organization, PAI came up and offered us a grant to work on the population aspect. And we partnered with the district health office to do the health aspect. So we can have donors also partnering, different donors providing different funds for each of the PH and E, and also implementers partnering. And you know, we linked up with Family Planning Association of Malawi because they're the service, they're the experts. And so that way, I think partnerships is the way to go to implement PHE. But it's important for environmentalists and population experts and health experts to appreciate and understand these linkages. Otherwise, there's no start, you know, where do you start if they don't understand? And that's what I was mentioning, that it's important to see pilot sites and understand how it's actually happening, and hear from the communities when they tell us that, you know, it's better to have an integrated approach because they live integrated lives. M&D, we haven't, we're not very strong with that, yes. So it just evolved, and this project was for 5 years, and we didn't have indicators on P and H into our M&D system. But during the PHE conference, the Futures Group, I think, came up with an Excel sheet of how you can have M&D indicators right from the planning. So these tools are available, and it's a matter of using them for future projects. Is that all? Is there another?
Okay.
Okay. Maybe a little bit on the M&E. At the Lake Victoria Basin Commission, what we are interested in is, of course, we are interested to see the family planning prevalence rate rise, but also we are developing indicators on the value for integration, because the key thing is integration. Governments are implementing family planning projects. They're implementing environmental conservation projects and civil society organizations. But the unique thing is integration. So in the M&E, how can you measure the value of integration? I think that is what we need to be thinking of, because it should not just be business as usual. So we are in the process of developing indicators that will really bring out that value of integration. And I would like also to say that at our level as experts, we, or rather whatever we are, professionals, we may not be experts in all these things. I'm not an environmental conservation expert, but health, population, and all that. But at the beneficiary level, we want to get a holistic expert. The champions we are talking about in the communities should be people, they may not really understand the science of it, but they must be able to articulate the basics of population, health, and environment in an integrated manner. So we are talking about building capacity of beneficiaries so that we can generate champions who are all round. So at our level, it may be difficult, but as Deepa said, the need for partnerships is very important. I'll give you an example. we are coordinating a project in Mount Elgon. I don't know if anybody here, maybe the lady from Uganda, there's another mountain in the East African community called Mount Elgon, shared by Kenya and Uganda. We have a conservation project funded by the Norwegians. They have been funding that project for the last 8 years. They are not seeing results. So when we're moving to the third phase, they said, it's not necessary putting our money in a project when we actually don't see results. We don't see the trees. We don't see the protected areas being conserved. Reason, women have 8 to 15 children on average. So they said, Lake Victoria Basin Commission must now think of what to do with the population if they need our money. So when this PHE program came in, and we told them, we are now going to the Mount Elgon ecosystem to address issues of population, family planning, reproductive health, child health. They said, now we will bring our money to do conservation. So partnerships are extremely important. Now, coming to the last question. There are 3 countries that fetch water from the lake: Kenya, Uganda, Tanzania. Rwanda and Burundi do not fetch any water from the lake. But as I said in my presentation, they have very important ecosystems that determine whether the lake will survive or die. For example, there is a river called the Kagera River. That is the river that brought the water hyacinth into Lake Victoria, that invasive weed. It originated from Kagera River, and Kagera River has its source in Rwanda and Burundi. And there are forests. There's an ecosystem called the Nyungwe Kibira ecosystem, a huge forest that also determines how much water River Kagera will pour into Lake Victoria. So these 2 countries are very, very important because they have these key natural resources that actually determine the health of the Lake Victoria. So when it comes to PHE, that we have had no challenge at all. They feel that introducing population health and environment in those ecosystems around the Kagera River will actually help to sustain Lake Victoria. So there is no challenge so far, because our PHE program is not just about the lake. It is about the lake and the catchment. That is the lake and the basin. Last but not least, I'm glad to meet you, Kiki. We have communicated on email. I gave just a short overview about the HOPE project, Health of People and the Environment in Lake Victoria Basin. This project is just completing the pilot phase. We work in partnership with the Pathfinder International on this Pathfinder Uganda. And Lake Victoria Basin Commission has made sure that the evidence generated from HOPE has reached the precedents. We have the convening power. The treaty gives Lake Victoria Basin Commission the power to convene civil society organizations and governments to take whatever best practices that are generated from projects to the highest levels. And that is what we have done for the HOPE project. And ministers are amazed. Members of parliament have been able to visit the HOPE project through the Lake Victoria Basin Commission. And that is one of our major roles in that region.
Great, thank you. Yes, let's take a couple more questions. Linda?
I just have a comment on M&E because we just finished the Balance project. And I've noticed this. I've been in development for many, many years, as many of us have been. And I think for the Balance project, we had a very strong M&E plan. We had strong indicators. We worked very hard to make sure they were integrated. There were several challenges. First of all, there was a survey, and I'm racking my brain, and I can't remember the name of it. I think it's called, they did this for ASAP, Mark, you might remember this. Is it the BCS Behavior Change Survey?
Mm-hmm.
It's called BCS. You can find it again on Knowledge for Health workshop. We have instructions on how to do it. It's got integrated questions and instructions on how to conduct the survey, analyze the data, et cetera, et cetera. And the best results we got was out of our Tanzania project because we started early. Now, all of us know that it takes a while to start projects up, and by the time you get going, you all have about 1 strong year before you start wrapping down and ending. And so unless you can get everybody started up at the same time at the very beginning of the project, it's very hard to get projects really rocking and rolling enough to get some good data. So that was one of our challenges and lessons learned from the Balance Project was, for example, we had seed grants, but some of them didn't start till the 3rd year. Well, they had, good 18 months before we had to start wrapping down. So I think part of the issue is these projects aren't long enough, and it takes them way too long to start up. So, again, another plea to donors would be, can we make these projects somewhat longer? Because it really does, we all know, start up and wrap up takes 2 years. So you got 3 really good years. But I encourage you to go to the PHE Toolkit. There's lots of M&E plans on there. There's results on there. There's integrated indicators on there. It's not by Balance Project. We put that all on the K4Health site, but it's got a history of what other people have done, not just the Balance Project. We probably have, little tiny real estate on there. There's a lot more real estate, and it's a great tool that I encourage everybody to go to and look at. And it's hard to find it, so just do a Google search. It comes up faster.
Thank you, Linda. I think someone here, yes, please.
Hi, my name is Krista Heiner from Eco Agriculture Partners. And I've really enjoyed, I think, hearing a lot of the talk about integration and sectors, getting out of silos and all that kind of stuff. We do a lot of that at Eco Agriculture Partners as well. I'm really curious, I guess, to find out what links you both see with agriculture, the agriculture sector. I know, Deepa, you talked about some conservation agriculture, and another thing that just comes to mind is, malnutrition as a major link that might, but I'm curious if there's others that you have experienced in your work and how we could maybe integrate again at another level.
Great, thank you. So I'd like to add 2 more questions for your consideration. And I'd like you to imagine a little that a donor came to you and said, Doreen, Deepa, I have some money, and I'm trying to figure out where I would like to go next. I would like to be, and you could imagine this could be a donor like USAID, may come to you and said, we need to develop a new 5-year plan and strategy for PHE. So they can bring some money to this. They're looking at the 5-year framework. What would you say is needed next based on your experience on PHE? What should a donor who is committed and interested in this be funding? What is your advice? That's my first question. And the second question is I'm going to build off of Sandeep's question. Sandeep asked you, what are you doing? What did you do last week? I'm going to ask you, what are you doing the rest of this week? So we have 3 questions looking at the links to agriculture. A donor comes to you and say, what's on your dream list? What would you want me to support in the next 5 years? And what are you doing the rest of this week? Who would like to start?
You want to start? Okay.
Well, I'm going to answer it personally. For me, I think the important things for Malawi is child mortality is 50 per 1,000, and maternal mortality is 510 per 100,000. And the stunting, 50% of Malawian children are stunted, and malnutrition is quite high. Food security is a big issue. So I would want to link agriculture to better nutrition for children and mothers. I've seen women who go through pregnancy without gaining a single kilo, or they're gaining very little. So you can imagine how much, how it would affect their bodies. So nutrition and food security is very important. And so we want to link agriculture. Again, climate change comes in because the dry spells are increasing, rainfall patterns are changing, so we need to make agriculture resilient to those changes. And as an outcome, we need to reduce stunting. So we can look at maybe having women's groups set up little timber gardens near the wetland gardens and producing vegetables and nutritious food so that we achieve those outcomes. So the health and agriculture, and then there's a bit of the environment, climate change coming in, and also for women, reducing fertility, improving access to family planning, thereby making themselves healthier. With regard to your Roger Mark's question, at a national level, if donor wants to increase or have PHE as a system that the government should follow, we have to start coordination between all those committees that we have in Malawi. There's a technical committee on climate change, which looks only at climate change things. Then there's a technical committee, technical working group on population. I think there are about 12 technical working groups. And not everybody is a member of that. There are different people who are members of all these, and they're not really talking to one another. So we need to have some kind of a way to coordinate all those working groups and committees, or at least share experiences at a forum once a year or something, in order to make the others understand what each of these committees are doing. Yeah.
Thank you. Links with the agriculture sector. The minimum package we've developed for PHE services has a large component on nutrition and conservation agriculture for livelihoods improvement. And therefore, we are working very closely with the, in the East African community, we call them ministries responsible for agriculture and food security. Although last week we were told it is food sovereignty, not security. It has been baptized. Okay, now, if a donor came to me and said, here is some money, and what is it you would want to prioritize for PHE? I thank you for that question, because 2 weeks ago a donor came to me. And this was Danida, the Dutch. And it was as a result of the Danish, yes, from the Ethiopia meeting. Danida is developing their 5-year funding framework. And they feel they need to bring PHE on board. And they sent a consultant to Lake Victoria Basin Commission. And I was asked, in the next 5 years, if you got money, not that they were giving us, but it was a question similar to that, what would you do?
Somewhere.
And I told them 6 things based on our mandate. I want to repeat, we do not implement, but we coordinate, promote, and facilitate. So number 1, we would mainstream PHE into our hotspots, because we have a lot of hotspots. I mentioned the islands on Lake Victoria. I talked about the protected areas in Lake Victoria Basin, which are being encroached. I talked about the borders, our border crossings with a lot of population mobility. So number 1 is mainstreaming. Number 2 is replicating best practices. The HOPE project, which was a pilot project, has given us a lot of evidence. The East African community is huge, with a population of 120 million people, so we would want to replicate. HOPE project was in Kenya and Uganda. Tanzania, Rwanda, and Burundi are asking for another HOPE project. The third thing we would do is capacity building at different levels, because as I said, this is a relatively new approach, and there's need for capacity building. And that goes with the need to develop a curriculum, as I mentioned. Then policy review and harmonization, all said and done. What do we want to see as Lake Victoria Basin Commission? We want to see PHE mainstreamed into national and regional level policies. As it is now, our policies, our institutions, our strategic frameworks are silos. So we are talking of PHE. How can it get into the policies? How can the policies be reviewed? How can the laws be changed? Because I mentioned that we have inducted our members of parliament as well as the East African Legislative Assembly. So would want to see some bills coming up that are actually integrating PHE. And that is the role my organization plays in the basin. And last but not least, our advocacy. We are not stopping because it has to continue. Leaders are changing. Elections are being held. And therefore, as we get new leaders, we must continue fronting our advocacy.
Thank you, Doreen and Deepa. It's been a real pleasure. There's three things out of what go ahead. What are you doing this week?
What are we doing this week?
What are you doing this week?
Yes, this week we are interacting and we are sharing. Today we are here. Tomorrow I will be with the Population Reference Bureau. I don't know if Jason is here. We will be having a conversation there. And then we will be at the Population Action International for some briefing. And in the evening, I will be with Pathfinder, with Kiki. So it's a very busy day tomorrow. Then on Wednesday, we will be having briefing with congressional staff. Is it called On the Hill? I don't know which hill it is. But, I'm sure it's not Mount Kilimanjaro.
We wonder sometimes.
Yes, but we will be having a briefing on PHE. And of course, this is my first time in Washington, D.C., and therefore I should also get an opportunity to see this place. Though it's very cold, I came from a city in Kenya where the temperature was 114. So when I landed in New York, I thought I was going to die after 1 hour. But I'm still alive, and I'm glad I'm alive. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's been a real pleasure to give you a warm welcome to Washington, D.C., and also your first time in the United States.
Yes.
For both of you. So thank you very much. I know Deepa was telling me that she found folks in New York City very warm and welcoming. We hope you will appreciate how we are even more warm and welcoming in Washington, D.C. So just quickly to point out three things that I thought you talked about that was really good. You talked about climbing the tree from the top, and I thought throughout the discussion we had various points raised about different points of entry. Is it from the top? Is it from the bottom? Is it community driven? Is it being around a lake basin that has a fragile ecosystem? Is it the fact that there's a shared basin? So it was a very interesting discussion around different points of entry, and I liked how you talked about climbing the tree from the top. So very interesting perspective there. The second point for me, Doreen, and when you said this, we all smiled when you talked about Population Action International, and you said we seem to be like-minded. And it's interesting because ultimately, where are we headed? We all want to preserve the environment and improve the well-being of the communities. And yes, indeed, we seem to be like-minded, but yet we're coming from the position as an environmental organization, or someone who's focused on population reproductive health, someone who's focused on women's empowerment, and the different ways that we come together and have different types of partnerships being very important. So you all, both of you, emphasize that point. And then finally, the point, again for me, where you talked about you being perceived, Doreen, as the coordinator of software projects, but recognizing you gotta get the hardware in there. And the basics of it, Deepa, you spoke about the importance of beneficiaries. And I remember talking to your beneficiaries when we visited the project in the Radio Listeners Club. And one of the young women that we met and spoke with said to me 3 things. Number 1, in this radio listening program, who would have thought I would have heard my own voice on the radio? Number 2, who would have thought that everyone else in my country, Malawi, would be hearing my voice? And number 3, who would have thought I would be sitting across from a white man from Washington, D.C., talking about my work? And this sense of empowerment and benefit, and in a very short period of time. So once again, thank you for braving the cold and sharing your perspective and thoughts with us. It has been a real delight, and we know that you'll take the hill by storm, be it the hill here or Mount Kilimanjaro. So thank you very much. And thank you for the great questions. I encourage you to continue to visit our website at wilsoncenter.org and our blog at newsecuritybeat.org. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter also, and hang around for a little bit and chat more with Doreen and Deepa. Take advantage of their first visit to our city. That was wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. It was really